when we ask the question, what brings us here today? Think about this. If we don't have Pocahontas, we don't have this gathering today. We're actually here on March 21st, which is the anniversary of her death in Gravesend, England. So 400 odd years later, Pocahontas is still bringing us into historic questioning. Why are we here? So, you know, if you ask me, talk about you're from New Jersey. My dad was born in the Bronx, New York City. His father married a lady who, his last name was Schneideker. Her family came to New York in 1676. They were Dutch. My mom's family, English and Irish. So of course one asks the question, I ask it all the time, is that what brought me to such work that I would cross and intersect with Pocahontas in history? Well, the answer is Henricus. My staff and I are continuously researching the depths of not only her story, but everything that takes place in these years. And one of the greatest things we have as public historians is a couple of things that trigger in our brain. First thing is, it's everybody's history, and we're reaching into it. Two, one of the greatest things we have in our arsenal is that we will say we don't know. We're okay with that. There's things we don't know. With this story of Pocahontas, I went over there in 2017. Right, Rick? We were there. A couple of us were there. And I stood over her somewhere in that church where she's buried. And that moment, when all those things that we did over the anniversary of her death, I said, I've got to do a little more than what we just do on site. I wanted to finish a book. It's really the stuff we talk about on site, but I want to put it in a book form. But really, this is a hard subject. I don't even know how I could put it in a book, but I did. We decided to call it 10 Essential Facts, but we changed it. Because not everything is a fact. Part of it is questioned. So we called it 10 Essential Questions. What should we or what can we ask about Pocahontas' life? All right. So with that, I'm going to cover a few of these topics. And again, I'll reiterate at times. This is what we think we know. This is what we're not sure of. And this is what we don't know. All right? But I'm going to cover some stuff just to remind ourselves what this story is about. And remember, the focus for us is the English Pocahontas. She has a life before she's with the English in this moment. And she is certainly going to be remembered for that. I'm taking a story from the English evidence and putting it into a history. This is an English, mostly, perspective. Keep that in mind, all right? Just keep that tucked away, is that there are things that the English are going to be writing that might be skewed, either intentionally or unintentionally, or they just could be wrong. But my staff and I try to figure out what they wrote that was correct, right? So again, where to start? This is it. This is the anniversary of her death, March 21st. Every March 21st for the last decade or more of my life, every March 21st, my first thing hits my brain is I go, this is the day Pocahontas died. So why is she such a compelling figure? I mean, we can all look at that answer, but, you know, Luisa Menendez, she doesn't get remembered, but she is a native woman in Virginia before the English are here. She is going to live in the area around Saltville, Virginia, and when you have that Spanish column coming up from what's now outside Statesville, North Carolina, into Southwest Virginia, one of those Spanish soldiers is going to marry a native woman named Luisa, who will ultimately go and travel to St. Augustine, and eventually in the Spanish military there's pensions and documents, and that's how we know that there is a Spanish soldier and a native woman married in around 1567. Again, looking back in history, I wouldn't have known about her if I didn't study Pocahontas. So what other women are crossing our paths that are in compelling stories? One of my favorite is Pocahontas. And yes, it took me 17 years to say that name correctly. Pocahontas, the queen of the Appomattox, her and her brother, Cossacom, are going to lead the Appomattox people. All right? She's kind of like opposite Pocahontas. She is going to lead what we know is her people at what is close to Point of Rocks. And she's also going to be the one that leads her warriors that she commands against the English on a few occasions. One of those attacks will eventually be witnessed by one of our first Burgesses, Thomas Dowes, who will survive that attack and come to write that story about how her and her women lured the English to shore. And then they get on shore and there's this attack. 14 Englishmen are killed in that attack. So the English are going to go after her, which they do. And the quote at the bottom says, "Her town we burnt and killed some of her people, herself miscarrying with small shot in pursuit in the woods," right? So Opasquinusky is a Joan of Arc. She's a Queen Elizabeth with her army at Tilbury Camp, riding amongst her men in the camp. And if you are in Virginia, you're in the circles of this history, you're very well aware of her, and that's her, the artwork done of her that's in our Virginia Capitol Square, I believe, right? And she's compelling. I mean, you can't have anything that's less compelling or more compelling, really, when you think about the context of it. You study her and you come to realize that, you know, after her husband Totopotomi is killed, fighting where? Side by side with the English, Battle of Bloody Run, what's now Richmond. She's basically going to take over her people. She's going to lead them through some really wicked times. Bacon's Rebellion, where her and her people had to literally hide in swamps. She brings her people out of that and then renegotiates with the English. She is going to have, well, if you look at the Treaty Mill Plantation, it's listed. There's her son, an Englishman named Captain John West. Interesting part of the story there. And of course, she will be signing that Treaty Mill Plantation in 1677. So really, a lot of our English history starts with Pocahontas in major ways, and then really kind of ties up with her, two females bookending that Powhatan history in the 17th century. I always throw oddballs in because I'm from New York. So we have our version of Pocahontas, which is, there she is, Catherine, who is Kateri, I always mess it up, Tekakwitha. And she died at 24. She was a conversion, and she's someone that if you're up in New York State, you learn about the Mohawks. It's a, you know, it's a strong part of the culture there. And she's basically the Pocahontas of New York, right? But again, she's not a Virginia story. So when we kind of go and dive through this, it's important to understand the timeline. I mean, my staff and I always get confused on the timeline. For other people around the world who come here, it's challenging, but you have to use the English stuff, kind of line things up, and that's the best you can do. Sometime in the mid-1590s, she's born. We have her friendship to Captain John Smith. John Smith, unfortunately, gives us two different ages for her. So you're kind of like, somewhere between this age and this age is how old she is. We know that there is this really interesting story with the Potawatomi, where she might have this first husband, Cocoam. We definitely know in spring 1613, Captain Samuel Argall is going to take her prisoner. And we know that by documents, Sir Thomas Dale will take responsibility for her time as a captive. And we know on April 5th, 1614, she's married to John Rolfe. These are more things concrete that we know. And we know on March 21st, 1617, she dies in quarantine on a ship at the dock at Gravesend, England. So where does this history come alive for us? I mean, her story's been told throughout the centuries. I could pick a million things out of a million history books, and this one is the one, I chose one. And this is Lydia Hunley Sigourney, which is she's a poet, American poet, mid-19th century, and she wrote a poem depicting the last moment Pocahontas is alive with her son Thomas Rolfe. I read that and it tears me up. So when you think about how people in our past look at Pocahontas, it's not just us. Victorian England, American society here in the 19th century into the 20th century, they are compelled by her story. So the nuts and bolts of what we're going to do today. What events led to Pocahontas' death March 21st, 1617? Again, for some of you in the room, I know you know some of this stuff. I always like to throw new material in there. So what are we looking at? So Captain Samuel Argall takes Pocahontas. How this lines up, mystery. In many ways, in some ways, Captain Samuel Argall writes in a letter. But we know the story goes through the Potawatomi tribe. We know that Henry Spellman is living with them when Captain Argall finds him there before he comes back to get Pocahontas later. Spellman, according to Captain John Smith, was rescued by Pocahontas in her father's captivity. Smuggled him out like a story from Harriet Tubman. goes into Powhatan's house, says, come on, Henry Spellman, I know you're my dad's prisoner, but I got to get you out of here. And takes Henry Spellman with warriors looking for them 2 days north to the Potawatomi for safekeeping there. I'm going to take a giant leap and say that Henry Spellman could not find his way out of Powhatan's capital to the Potawatomi on his own. Just saying. Spellman doesn't mention Pocahontas, but Smith does. So which one do you go with? So what does Argall take her? Our guy, Sir Thomas Dale, in his martial laws says, unless you have permission, you can't violate the Indians, especially ones that we're not at war with. The Potawatomi we're trading with. Argall takes a captive from the Potawatomi against Dale's codes. Argall writes a letter back to England. He simply says, I took her for so many English prisoners that her father was then keeping. So his justification is, her father's keeping some of our dudes, I'm going to take her. Never asked Dale, though. This is where the story is interesting, because she's around 17. She's possibly married to Coquitlam. A lot of people say she was. English even say she was. So Argall takes her by simply asking the Potawatomi, do you want to continue trade with me? If you want to continue trade with me, you're going to have to give me up Pocahontas. And they do. Brings her to Jamestown. Argall's going to send a message to Powhatan, right? That message says, let him know that I had taken his daughter, and if he would send home the Englishman who he has detained in slavery with such arms and tools as the Indians had gotten and stolen, and also a great quantity of corn, and that then he should have his daughter restored. Ransom, right? It's an old-fashioned ransom. The problem is, somebody's lying. Secretary Ralph Hamer, who's at Jamestown, he wrote, and it is true we heard nothing of him till 3 months after, when by his persuasions of others, he returned us several of our men, with each a musket unserviceable, sent us word that whensoever we pleased to deliver his daughter, he would give us satisfaction of his injuries. Powhatan saying simply, after 3 months thinking about it, I'm giving you your dudes back, the ones I have. Here's their old muskets. If this isn't good enough, then you're going to have to come see me eventually and finish it. All right? That's a power move. Right? Her daddy is a monarch. Here's what you got to do. 3 months, though. Pocahontas is sitting at Jamestown for 3 months. Sir Thomas Dale is going to find out about this. Now, I want you to remember what King James's commission for the Virginia Company said about dealing with the native people. In 1606, it says, well entreat those savages in the parts, and use all good means to draw the savages and heathen people to the true service and knowledge of God, and that all just, kind, and charitable courses shall be holden with such of them as shall conform themselves to any good and sociable traffic. That has gone away. But that is the king's instructions from the get-go in Virginia, and somebody just took the monarch's daughter. That's a problem. So Sir Thomas Dale, he is sent here with Reverend Whitaker for one big job. They are the fixers. This colony is failing. There's no discussion about that. Colony's failing, investments are drying up, the business is going to go away, somebody's got to come and restore it. Dale and Whitaker are those two gentlemen who will do that. That's what they're tasked with. So when Dale comes here, he goes right to work. Dale is, when I have my public in Rock Hall, I'm on site with them, I refer to Dale as Darth Vader, right? He pretty much is Darth Vader. He never gets sick. He comes off the ship from England, he goes right to work. He's here 5 years in the colony, never a mention of sickness or injury. Or he's a robot from the future. I don't know what he is, but Dale basically is the guy that is saying, I took the John Smith playbook and I am running with it. The Powhatans will respect me if I am a soldier first, get my people under control, and then if you're a native tribe here in Virginia and you're going after my people, I'm going to go after you. I'm going to be up front and tell you that's what it is. That's what Dale does when he comes to Virginia. So what does Dale do in the autumn of 1611? Here we are, sitting in the middle of it. Dale is going to take over 300 men from Jamestown with ships on the river and men on foot going right through Powhatan's territory, is now saying, I'm setting up a new town. And that's where it's going to be. And you can see on the Fry-Jefferson map, which is really cool, right? This is in the 18th century. Still has some of the names here, right? Still says Arahatic. Dale is going to put his settlement where he scouted the summer before, where the Arahatic, one of the Powhatan tribes, this was their land. But nobody documents the Arahatic after a certain year. They literally poof. We think, my staff and I, that they got absorbed by Parahunt, which was one of Powhatan's sons. And that would be modern-day Richmond. So Dale and Pocahontas, this now brings them together. Dale and Pocahontas are going to intersect, right? But when all that mess is going on with Argyle, Dale is right here building. 7-acre fort of Henricus in 1613 has already been built. He's now building Coxendale over there. He's building Rokedale over there, Bermuda 100 over there, Mount Mulatto over there, the Reverend's house over there. Dale is doing that when the Pocahontas stuff happens. Somehow, he finds out about it as the High Marshal of Virginia, and he's now got to be responsible for it. So Dale has to take over the situation. All right? So we're right here right now, obviously. This is Farrar's Island, Coxendale. This is the power plant right here. Reverend's house. And according to John Rolfe's will, this is his existing property in 1622. What we know is Bermuda 100. Right? Just to give you a perspective on where we're at. I got a big question. It's a giant question. When Sir Thomas Dale takes over responsibility for Pocahontas somewhere in 1613, is he bringing her to Reverend Alexander Whitaker's house a mile or so from the fort at Henricus because it is isolated? It's nowhere near anybody. Privacy, focus, all these things can happen at the Reverend's house. So that house is called Rock Hall. Rock Hall probably sat somewhere on the road towards Wawa up on Route 1. Probably right off what is now Osborne Road. Probably underneath Interstate 95 is where that house probably is, if I was to take my guess. But we've reconstructed it out here on site. Dale's letters. Remember in this story we have Dale's letters. We don't have any Pocahontas letters. We have John Rolfe's letters, but we don't have any Pocahontas letters. We have Reverend Whitaker's letters, but we don't have Pocahontas letters. So everything I'm telling you is from these guys, not from Pocahontas, but this is what they say. What does Dale say? Powhatan's daughter I carefully instructed in the Christian religion, who after she made some good progress therein, renounced publicly her country idolatry, opened and confessed her Christian faith, was as the desired baptized, and is since married to an English gentleman. Were it but the gaining of this one soul, I will think my time, toil, and well spent. Dale and Whitaker are evangelical. It's no surprise. A lot of the major investors to the Virginia Company, Archbishop of Canterbury, all of them have religious objectives here in the New World. You know what the religious objective is? It's the same thing that the Jesuits and the priests are doing for the Catholic Church. How many native people can we bring to God? So when Dale and Whitaker are sent here, you read their letters, it is all about the mission of religion. All right? Tobacco is going to grow? Thank God. Our buildings go up? Thank God. Are we flourish here? Thank God. And if we are successful with the Indians, thanks to God. Dale basically has those beliefs. And this one line where he says, wherein my principal care hath been to get some of our savages to whom we may teach both our language and religion, conforming to King James's charter and his personal beliefs. If I threw a Jeopardy $1 million question at you, would you know the answer to this one? Who was the first native in Virginia that Dale worked on conversion? It's $1 million. This is going to be the first. This is the one, Dr. Casey. This is the new. This is the first. Okay.
Okay, bring it on.
So the first native is Toddykins. Toddykins was a native male, probably older. And Dale wrote a letter back to England, says, I tried. I sent him back to England. And when Dale's asking in a letter, what happened to him? No word. So we think that Dale basically said, Pocahontas is under my care. I'm not sending her to England to some scholar over there. She's going to stay with me here at Henricus. This guy will teach her. By the way, that's his dad. I don't have a picture of Reverend Alexander Whitaker. His father is William Whitaker. That's his picture. And his dad was an epic scholar, Doctor of Divinity at Cambridge. This is the guy that changed everything for me in this story. In fact, it changes my whole perspective about the English and their view of the Indians. Not everybody has the same view of the Indians. Reverend Whitaker, he's been tasked with answering a question here in Virginia. It's important. It's important to the future of Virginia. If we're failing in Virginia, is it the Indians' fault? That's the question he's tasked with answering. His answer is, it is not the Indians' fault. It's our fault. It's our own weaknesses. As far as the Powhatans go, they have reasonable souls and intellectual faculties as well as we, as well as us. Says it twice in his letters. He's fascinated by the Powhatans, and you got to remember, there is no Protestant playbook for how to handle the Indians here. Everything learned about the Indians in America is by the Catholic Church. His father is an anti-papist. Whitaker, Native people. I have a nice quote from Whitaker about Native people again. They are a very understanding generation, quick of apprehension, sudden in their dispatches, subtle in their dealings, exquisite in their inventions, and industrious in their labors. They observe the limits of their own possessions, encroach not upon their neighbors' dwellings, murder, which is murder, capital crime scarce heard among them. Many footsteps of God's footprint. If you read Whitaker's letters, he can't say it, but he believes it, that the natives are closer to Christianity without being Christians than many of his own people are. And he says, lastly, we all have Adam for a common parent. And his letters will point out, if you are bad-mouthing the Indians, you're bad-mouthing the work of God, because if you're a true Christian, you believe that God created them with a purpose. And where they're at right now is essentially their purpose. That's pretty heavy stuff. How many people have heard of Reverend Whitaker? Not too many people, right? So what's Pocahontas got to go through in this process? Emotional stress, physical stress, intellectual stress. You ever want to know those things? Just come see me in Rock Hall any day. I'm telling you, if you've done it, I can't do it in here. I'll throw a word at you, lactose intolerance. I'll throw corset. I can throw a million things the English will do with her that she's not used to. By the fact that she's a prisoner and the fact that she's got to switch her religions. Just add them all up. Where does Pocahontas get her name Rebecca? It's got to read Genesis, 40 pages in. Anyone's curious what Reverend Whitaker and Pocahontas were thinking in her education? Read the story of Rebecca. I have many religious people, non-religious people. I say just read it. They'll give you a better sense of why she's called Rebecca. This is the big moment. People ask me a million times over, how did Pocahontas get married to Rolfe? The English are not the originators of it. There's not a single Englishman, not a single leader that says, we're going to marry some guy to Pocahontas. What happens is that Dale finally, after working up here, says, all right, I'm going to go answer Powhatan. He takes 150 men in armor, muskets, sails up the now York, then Pamunkey River, and who's on that ship? Pocahontas. Whole bunch of people. John Rolfe. They're skirmishing, and right before Dale gets to the Powhatan capital, there's several hundred Powhatan warriors waiting. Dale's 150 men are facing off against Opechancanough and several hundred Powhatan warriors. It's going to be a bloodbath. I'm pretty certain Dale's guys wouldn't end well on that one. Pocahontas sends a message off Dale's ship to her father. I want to talk to you. He denies it. Her brothers come to Dale's ship. John Rolfe, with an interpreter, is now talking with Opechancanough and his delegation. All those conversations are happening, and 1 month later, there's a marriage. You tell me who was the one? Who was the catalyst for this marriage? I can tell you that it adds up that it was Powhatan, for sure. At least mostly, sure. To this guy, he has bad luck. His wife, daughter, they die in Bermuda. You probably know that part of the story. John Rolfe is going to be known for his Spanish seed tobacco, but to me, I know him more for his letter to Dale to marry Pocahontas. Rolfe's letter to marry Pocahontas. He's got to ask Dale for permission. In his letter, you'll understand that John Rolfe, too, is very evangelical. God hath often demanded of me why I was created, if not for transitory pleasures and worldly vanities, but to labor in the Lord's vineyard. Sure, if I were so sensually inclined, I might satisfy such desire, yet with Christians more pleasing to the eye. Embrace that for one moment. John Rolfe is talking about English women, him marrying another English woman. He's a widower. Pocahontas, by her age, undoubtedly has facial tattoos. Who in England is married to anybody with facial tattoos? Or any tattoos? Think about that. She marries Rolfe April 5th, 1614. This is the wonderful part of the story. Sir Thomas Dale is the only one that mentions the marriage officially. And what does he say? You all know it. If you study this with us, if you've been around us. Not they were married in the Henricus church, not that they were married in the Jamestown church, not that they were married in the Bermuda City church. He just wrote that they were married in the church. No minister, even though there's probably 4 or 5 in the colony, not a single minister is listed as marrying them. I don't know why. I have no idea. To this day, I still don't know why. So they're going to go on tour. This is where the story winds down quickly, as you know. Why is Pocahontas in England? Why are the Rolfes in England? Sir Thomas Dale is doing a victory lap. You sent me to Virginia to fix it. Guess what I did? I fixed it. I have got evidence of that because I got Utamatamakan, who is an ambassador for Powhatan, coming with me with a delegation of native people. I've got Pocahontas, now Rebecca Rolfe, married to one of ours. There's no fighting, there's an alliance, and I'm going to show that off. And what are we going to do with Pocahontas? We're going to put her on tour. She goes on tour. She's going to be propaganda for the Virginia Company. This is a failing colony. What's one of the presumptions of why it was failing? The Indians. He's bringing them all back saying, no, that's not the problem. We know she's going to have issues with her lungs, the coal air in London. She gets brought out of the city for a while, get better air. And while she does that, a place called Brentwood, she's going to run into Captain John Smith, her old friend, which nobody told Pocahontas that she was, well, hey, Pocahontas, I just want to let you know, Captain Smith, he actually lived. No one ever told her that. Of all the people that could have. So there's that. You know what you guys know the line, right? What she said when she met Smith? She said, basically, you guys could have told me that he was still alive. And then she went on to tell him about how the English lied much. And to them, lying isn't telling someone what they thought they knew is incorrect. You didn't tell me I was wrong thinking he was dead. So she is going to meet King James and Queen Anne. She's going to see a nice play. She's going to do all kinds of stuff, but she's getting weak. Eventually, she's going to get on a ship to come back. She is on another ship with Captain Argyle, the George. She is going to contract something. She is simply at London getting on board a ship. Somebody thought she was well enough for that voyage. Put her on the ship. One day down the Thames, she is, well, put in quarantine. She is going to basically have her last words. All must die, but enough her child should liveth. And then she apparently said that she accepted her new faith, right? And that was published by a minister. Imagine that, right? So the question is, minister published it. Did she say it? Did she not say it? I hate saying the minister's the lie. I don't know. When you go into the church where she's buried, they have the original, the book, the vestry book, where somebody, when she died and they buried her in the church, somebody drew in, we buried her. And that book is it's on a table like this with a piece of glass. And I couldn't get my nose close enough to it. I mean, it's like it's there. Somebody on the day, this was by Pocahontas, this book, by John Rolfe, by all these people. And it's still there today, But it says, Rebecca Rolfe, wife of Thomas Rolfe, a gentleman in Virginia, lady born, was buried in the chancel, right? So she is up in the front part of the church, chancel somewhere underneath the floor. So the final part of the story is, we're asking, what would happen if all these people made it? We have Pocahontas die in England, right? March 21st, 1617. The man who was supposed to go home with them, done with his contract, was Reverend Whitaker. He said in his last letter, nope, staying there to finish my work. He drowns in the James River here in 1617. He was clearly someone who was both capable of empathizing and sympathizing with the native plight here with the English being in this colony. Powhatan dies a year later, 1618. Sir Thomas Dale, who was going to come back and take his land holdings here, he's doing the work for the company that is now the London East India Company, setting up a headquarters in Jakarta, Indonesia. He dies off the coast of India in 1619. John Rolfe signs his will in early March of 1622. John Rolfe vanishes from humanity on March 22nd, 1622. All the people that were involved in Pocahontas' life and the peace alliance that came from her marriage to Rolfe are now gone, which changes everything for a while. Conclusions. You can come up with your own conclusions. One of the things that my staff and I are taught to do, we want to give you the questions. It's okay if you have different conclusions. Some of the conclusions that I've come up with over the years, Pocahontas' marriage saved the Virginia Company. They were going to pack up and go home. There's no money. Powhatan gained an unlimited trade, a military alliance, and a partial role with English policy in that alliance. The English basically used this to grow. They are going to be allowed to now settle in Cape Cod. You know them as the Pilgrims. King James ain't going to do that if Virginia fails. After that, Sir Thomas Dale's on his way to India and Indonesia. What you find is that the king has now said, I'm okay with expansion out. So Pocahontas, Virginia, is the beginning of the British Empire. So what do we do today? Every day here is Pocahontas Day, and on whatever part of the site. We're touching on her both out here in the Reverend's house and a lot of times in our school programs. Always mentioning her in some way. Found that cool map. So this is how big Gravesend was a few years before 1600, right? This is when they think the Armada is coming to England. Gravesend's where she died, and this is the defenses they built for the Spanish that eventually never made it up to Thames. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you guys coming out with us today.